Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The compensation from the factory for your broken back is already with my mom. She's flying to the Caribbean tomorrow, announced my pleased husband. I simply pressed a button on the phone, and a voice came through the speaker that made him go pale. Metallic crashing, a harsh screech, and then blinding pain. That's how Elena's ordinary workday began. The factory line, humming steadily for years, suddenly jolted, dropping a multi-ton beam onto the section where the young woman was working. She remembered only the beginning, the screech of metal, a colleague's scream, and the strange sensation of flying when the blast threw her backwards. Then, darkness, and fragmented memories of an ambulance, white coats, and anxious voices. "Compression fracture of the spine," said the ER doctor. "She'll need surgery." Surgery, rehab, endless injections, IVs, procedures, for Elena, it all blurred into one endless day divided into equal intervals of medical intervention. At 28, she was learning to sit again, enduring pain so intense it brought cold sweat to her forehead. Time passed differently in the hospital. It stretched like rubber during painful treatments and then snapped into brief, compressed moments whenever Diego visited. Her husband came every other day, always with the same box of chocolates, which Elena couldn't eat due to her diet, and the obligatory bouquet of red roses, his mother's favorite flowers. "Carmen says hi," he'd say from the doorway, as if that were the news she was waiting for. "She's so worried." Wanted to come, but her blood pressure's acting up. Elena gave a weak smile. In 5 years of marriage, she had learned to recognize these little falsehoods. Her mother-in-law had treated her as a temporary nuisance in her son's life from day one, like a head cold that would eventually go away. Carmen, an elegant woman in her early 50s with perfect hair and a string of pearls around her neck, always found a way to remind Elena who was really in charge in their little family. "You know," Diego sat on the edge of her hospital bed, "Mom says we should sue the factory. Compensation and all that." Elena looked at her husband, tall, well-built, with soft features and a face that still held something boyish at 33. Someone else might have found him attractive, but to Elena he was just his mother's obedient son. 5 years ago, on their first date, that boyish enthusiasm had seemed charming. Back then, she didn't realize it masked a pathological inability to make decisions without his mother's approval. "Let your mother handle the lawsuit," she replied dryly, turning toward the window. "No, no." Diego jumped up. "She just suggested it. I'm handling it. I already talked to the factory's lawyer. They're willing to pay compensation without going to court, as long as we don't make a fuss." Elena closed her eyes. The pain in her back was flaring up again, crashing over her in waves. But even that was easier to bear than the realization that her husband had discussed her injury and its compensation with his mother before even speaking to her. "Do what you want," she said at last. "I just need to rest." Diego nodded, kissed her forehead, and left, promising to come back the next day. "Gotta call Mom," was the last thing she heard as the door shut behind him. The following weeks blurred into the monotonous rhythm of hospital life. Elena was learning to live again in a broken body, slowly adjusting to a new reality, physiotherapy, painkillers, exercises, and Diego's increasingly rare and formal visits, as he spent more and more time handling the compensation. He spoke of lawyers and documents, but never once asked what she wanted. Then came the day everything changed. Diego burst into the hospital room like a whirlwind, not with roses this time, but real orchids, a bottle of champagne, prohibited in the hospital, and eyes burning with excitement. "We did it," he shouted from the doorway. "Elena, we did it." She tried to sit up against the pillows, wincing in pain. "What did we do?" "The compensation." Diego was pacing around the room, unable to sit still. $1.5 million. $1.5 million, Elena. Her heart skipped a beat. 1.5 million pesos. A sum that could change their lives. Enough for specialized treatment, rehabilitation, maybe even a small apartment where she wouldn't have to see her mother-in-law every day in the next room. That's incredible," she whispered, feeling tears well up in her eyes. For the first time, not from pain, but from hope. When will we get it? Diego froze for a moment, and something in his expression made her stomach tighten. I already got it, he said, with a strange note in his voice. Through the power of attorney you signed. Remember? Elena remembered. 3 weeks ago, Diego had brought her some documents, mumbling something about needing her signature to process the compensation. She had signed without reading. The pain was especially bad that day, and all her energy had gone into just staying conscious. Where's the money? She asked, feeling a wave of anxiety rising inside her. Diego walked to the window, turning his back to her. In the sunlight, his figure looked almost ghostly. I transferred it to Mom's account, he said too quickly, as if he wouldn't be able to say it at all if he slowed down. For safekeeping. You know how good she is with money. The silence that followed was so thick, it felt like something tangible. Elena stared at her husband's back, not trusting her own ears. You transferred the compensation for my injury to your mother's account? She asked, hoping she had misunderstood. Diego turned around. His face wore a strange expression, a mix of guilt and excitement. Elena, this is amazing, he exclaimed. Mom has dreamed of the Caribbean for so long. And now she can go. Her flight is tomorrow. Can you imagine? It's her lifelong dream. Elena felt the room start to spin around her. The compensation for her broken back, for months of unbearable pain, for her lost job, all of it going toward her mother-in-law's vacation? What about my treatment? She asked quietly. Rehabilitation? Our future? Diego waved his hand with the carelessness of someone brushing off a fly. Mom's got it all figured out. She'll give back some of the money when she returns. For something, for you. And anyway, the factory's paying for your treatment, right? He beamed, clearly proud of his practicality. Elena looked at him and realized that in 5 years of marriage, this man had remained a stranger. She had been living with a mama's boy, someone whose loyalty always belonged to another woman. Diego, she said slowly, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice, that money is mine. It's compensation for my injury. How could you? But her husband wasn't listening. He was already chirping about how his mother deserved this vacation, how she had sacrificed everything for him, how she raised him alone after his father left for some whore. The same tired story Elena had heard dozens of times, the tale of the saintly mother and the heartless father who abandoned them when Diego was only 7. Elena had once believed that story. But now, looking at her husband's glowing face, as he gushed about how his mother would spend the money that was meant for Elena's broken body, she began to doubt. What if the truth was different? What if Raphael, the father she had never met, had simply run from that woman like someone fleeing a natural disaster? Diego kept talking, oblivious to the shift in her expression. Inside Elena, something had ignited. A fire of rage she had never felt before. Compensation for her suffering, her shattered spine, months of torment, all handed over to that pearl-draped predator. When Diego finally fell silent, Elena calmly reached for her phone on the nightstand. A simple movement that cost her great pain, but she didn't show it. Diego watched her curiously, puzzled, as she dialed a number he didn't recognize. A number she had saved a year ago, after stumbling across Raphael's profile on social media. The phone rang. Then a click. And a deep, slightly hoarse voice said, "Hello." Diego's face went white as a hospital sheet. He recognized that voice, even though he hadn't heard it in over 20 years, the voice still echoing in his childhood memories. The deep, gravelly voice of his father. "Hello," the voice repeated when the silence stretched on. Elena looked directly into Diego's eyes wide with shock, confusion, and fear. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a flicker of pity for him. But pain and betrayal quickly drowned out that fleeting emotion. "Good afternoon, Don Raphael," she said calmly. "My name is Elena. I'm your son Diego's wife." There was a heavy silence on the line. For a moment, Elena thought the call had dropped, then she heard a sharp intake of breath. "Elena?" The voice had softened, cautious. What's happened? Is Diego all right? He's fine, she answered, not taking her eyes off her pale-faced husband, who was opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. I'm not. She explained the situation briefly. The workplace injury. The compensation. The money wired to his mother's account. The Caribbean cruise. With each word, the voice on the phone grew colder. Sharper. Metallic. When she finished, Raphael was silent for a few long seconds. I'll take care of it, he said at last, and in those two words there was such calm confidence that even Elena felt a chill down her spine. But it will take some time. Where are you? She gave him the name of the hospital and her room number. I'll be there in the morning, Raphael said shortly, then hung up. Diego stood in the middle of the room, clenching and unclenching his fists. His face, usually so soft and good-natured, was twisted with fear and rage. You knew where he was all this time, he whispered. And didn't tell me? Elena set the phone aside and looked at her husband as if he were a stranger, coolly, appraisingly, without warmth. And you knew you had a wife all this time, yet still chose your mother. Diego shook his head violently, as if trying to shake her words off. He abandoned us, he suddenly screamed. Left us for some whore. You don't understand. You betrayed me. No, Diego. Elena spoke slowly, clearly, like explaining something to a child. You betrayed me when you gave my money to your mother. When you decided that her dream vacation was more important than my health. Diego grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Elena was left alone. A strange calm settled over her, like the stillness after a long storm. She sank back onto her pillow and closed her eyes. The next morning, the door opened, and Elena saw a man she didn't recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with a military posture and close-cropped silver hair. His face was lined and stern, but his eyes, the same eyes as Diego's, looked at her with a quiet gentleness. Elena, he asked, and she recognized the voice from the phone. I'm Raphael. May I come in? She nodded, and the man approached the bed with a grace surprising for his size. In his hands, he held a small bouquet of wildflowers, not gaudy roses or standard carnations, but simple daisies and cornflowers. These are for you, he said, holding them out. Sorry, it's not much. I wasn't prepared. Elena accepted the flowers, surprised by their scent, the smell of summer and freedom, so out of place in the sterile hospital air. Thank you for coming, she said, unsure how to behave around this unfamiliar relative. Raphael pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, resting a worn leather briefcase on his knees. I've started the process of getting the money back, he said without preamble. My people are working on it. Carmen will be pulled off the flight an hour before takeoff. The money will be returned, although we'll only get half of the tour cost back. Cancellation penalties will eat the rest. Elena blinked, astonished at his efficiency. How did you manage all that so fast? The corner of his mouth twitched in something like a smile. I worked in security services for 25 years, he said simply. Still have contacts. I'm retired now, in the fish trade. Not as exciting, but more peaceful. He steadied her with a professional's gaze. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. How did you meet Diego? What's your relationship with Carmen like? What did my son tell you about me? And most importantly, how's your back? So Elena told him. How she met Diego at a friend's company party 5 years ago. How she fell in love with his kindness and enthusiasm. How she was stunned the day she met his mother, a woman who immediately began setting rules and asserting control over their married life. How Carmen constantly reminded her son of her sacrifices, of how his father had left her for some whore. She never named that woman, Elena noted. She always just said that whore. I couldn't even picture her face. At that, Raphael let out a bitter chuckle. Because she never existed, he said quietly. There was no other woman. I left Carmen because I couldn't take her control, her manipulation, her lies anymore. She turned me into a shadow, an accessory to her life. And when I finally left, she swore I'd never see my son again. His face twisted briefly in the pain of that memory. And she kept her promise. I tried to see Diego. I went to his school, wrote letters, called, but she intercepted everything, twisted it all. Told him I'd abandoned them, that I was a traitor. Then they moved, and I lost track of them. Elena looked at this strong man, broken by the grief of losing his son, and her heart ached for him. "How did you find me?" Raphael asked. "On social media?" Elena nodded. "By chance. A year ago, I was looking up Diego's relatives, planning a surprise for his birthday, a family tree. I found your profile. There was a photo of you with little Diego. I knew instantly who you were. And you didn't tell him?" She shook her head. "I wanted to. But when I hinted that maybe the story about his father wasn't so black and white, she paused, remembering her husband's cold fury that night, the shouting, the broken plate. He got very angry. Said I was betraying him by doubting his mother's words." Raphael nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had long suspected. "Carmen was always good at persuasion," he said quietly. "And she always knew how to manipulate Diego. He was such a sensitive, impressionable boy. That's why I kept your number but didn't call. I was afraid it would only hurt him." Elena opened her mouth to reply, but the door to the room suddenly burst open. Carmen appeared in the doorway, immaculate as ever in a cream-colored suit and a string of pearls around her neck. Behind her stood a confused, hesitant Diego. Carmen froze when she saw Raphael. Her usually composed face twisted in shock and fury. "You," she hissed. "How dare you?" Raphael rose slowly. Even with age, he towered over his ex-wife like a mountain. "Hello, Carmen," he said calmly. "It's been a long time." Carmen turned to Elena. Her eyes narrowed with rage. "You," she spat. "You orchestrated this." "Mom," Diego stepped forward, but didn't dare enter the room fully. Carmen paced like a cornered fox. "They pulled me off the plane," she shrieked. "Like a criminal. Everyone was staring. I lost half the tour money, all because of you, you little tramp." Elena watched the woman, always so poised, so elegant, now unraveling before her, consumed by fury, and felt nothing but a calm, quiet satisfaction. "You stole my money," she said evenly. "The compensation for my injury. You were going to spend it on yourself while I lay here unable to walk. It was family money." Carmen screeched. Diego had every right. "No, he didn't," Raphael cut in, and there was something in his voice that made his ex-wife fall silent. "That money belongs to Elena, it's compensation for her injury, and it will be returned to her in full." He turned to his son, who still stood in the doorway. "Diego," he said gently, "son, I've waited so long for this moment." Diego took a step back, his face twisted in pain. "You left us," he whispered. "You left me." "No, son," Raphael shook his head, "I never left you. Your mother didn't let me see you. She hid my letters, intercepted my calls. Then you moved, and I lost all trace of you." "Don't listen to him," Carmen shouted. "He's lying, he always has." But something in Raphael's words, in his eyes, and his calm certainty, made Diego pause. He looked at this familiar stranger, and a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "I can't take this anymore," Elena said suddenly. Everyone turned toward her. "Diego, I'm filing for divorce." The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. Diego flinched as if struck. "Elena, you can't," he began. "I can," she interrupted, "and I will. I don't want to be part of this family anymore. I don't want to stay with a man who betrayed me when I needed him the most." Carmen let out a triumphant laugh. "Well, good. About time we got rid of this. Be quiet, mother." Diego's voice was quiet, but something in it froze Carmen mid-sentence. "Just be quiet." He turned and walked out of the room. A moment later, Carmen followed, casting one last venomous glance at her ex-husband and daughter-in-law. Silence fell over the room. Elena felt a strange lightness, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. Raphael sat down beside her again and gently took her hand. "What now?" he asked softly. Elena looked at this man, strong, dependable, offering help to a stranger simply because she had once been his son's wife. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I want to get better. I want to walk again." Raphael nodded thoughtfully. "I have a friend in Germany," he said. "One of the best spinal injury specialists. I can arrange treatment for you there." Elena stared at him, stunned. "But that must cost a fortune." "I can't accept." "You can," he said gently, interrupting her. "Think of it as my way of making things right. I couldn't protect my son from his mother. Maybe I can help you." Elena looked at his face, the face of a man who had suddenly become closer to her than her own husband, and she felt something begin to stir inside her. Something like hope. "Besides," Raphael added with a faint smile, "I'm not as poor as I look. The fish business, you know, surprisingly profitable." For the first time in many weeks, Elena laughed. It was short, almost painful, but real. At that moment, Raphael's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and nodded with satisfaction. "The money's in the process of being returned," he said. "My people will make sure Carmen gives it all back." "Your people?" Elena raised an eyebrow. Raphael gave a small shrug. 25 years in the security services, remember? Some connections don't rust. For the first time in many weeks, Elena felt she had made the right decision. That perhaps this break, not just in her spine, but in her life, was necessary. Necessary to free herself from toxic relationships and start again. "Tomorrow I'll bring all the documents for the divorce," Raphael said, standing up. "And in a week, if the doctors approve it, we'll arrange your transport to Germany." "You're doing too much for someone you barely know," Elena said, still not quite understanding his motives. Raphael looked at her with a warmth she hadn't seen in Diego's eyes in 5 years of marriage. "You know," he said softly, "when Carmen took my son from me, I lost a part of myself. For 26 years, I lived with that emptiness. And now, helping you, I feel like I'm finally doing something right. Like maybe not everything in this story is lost." He walked toward the door but paused on the threshold. "Also," he added without turning around, "you remind me of my little sister. She was the same, stubborn, brave, always ready to fight for what's right. She died in a car accident 20 years ago." With those words, he left, and Elena was alone with her thoughts, and the strange sensation that her life had just taken a sharp, new turn. The next day, Raphael returned with a thick stack of documents. He told her about a clinic in Hamburg, about Professor Schulz, a miracle worker for spinal injuries like hers. About a rehabilitation center in the countryside, surrounded by pine forests and fresh air, where patients learn to walk again. Elena listened, and the world, which only yesterday had seemed gray and hopeless, was gradually filling with color again. "What about Diego?" she asked suddenly, when Raphael paused. The man's face grew serious. "I tried to contact him this morning. I called, sent messages. No answer. I even stopped by your home, but no one was there." Elena nodded. She had expected something like this. Diego had always avoided confrontation, and now, faced with the collapse of his familiar worldview, he had probably just hidden away. Maybe with friends, more likely under the wing of his eternal protector, his mother. "He'll come back when he's ready," she said, surprised by her own calmness. "Or he won't come back at all. Either way, I'm not changing my decision." Raphael looked at her intently. "Do you truly want a divorce? After 5 years of marriage?" Elena paused. 5 years wasn't nothing. There had been good times, happy days. But always, like a shadow over them, loomed Carmen, controlling, manipulative, interfering in every decision they made. "Yes," she said firmly. "I can't live with a man who will always put his mother's wishes above my needs. I deserve better." Raphael nodded silently, and Elena saw approval in his gaze. That evening, Diego appeared. He entered the room without knocking, looking gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept all night. "Can we talk?" he asked hoarsely. Elena set down the book she had been reading and nodded. Diego sat in the chair his father had occupied just earlier and stayed silent for a long time, staring at the floor. "I spoke to my mom," he finally said. "She denies everything. Says my father's lying. Says he's always been a manipulator, and this is just revenge." Elena waited, letting him speak. "But then I remembered something," Diego continued, still not lifting his eyes. "When I was 8, I found a box of letters in the attic. Dozens of envelopes with my name on them, all unopened. I asked my mom about them, and she said they were old school documents and hid the box. I never saw it again." He looked up, and Elena saw pain and confusion in his eyes. "They were his letters, weren't they? All these years, he wrote to me. And I never knew." Elena nodded gently. "It seems so," she said softly. Diego buried his face in his hands. "God, what has my life become?" he whispered. "Everything I believed in, everything I knew, was it all a lie?" Elena felt a pang of sympathy. As angry as she was, she understood what he was going through. His worldview, his childhood, his relationship with his mother, all of it was crumbling before his eyes. "Diego," she said quietly, "I don't know what's true or false in your parents' story. But I do know that you betrayed me. You gave my money, the compensation for my injury, to your mother without even asking me. That is the truth. And that I cannot forgive." He nodded, his head still bowed. "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I'm so ashamed. I don't know what I was thinking. Mom said it would be better that way, that she'd take care of the money, that—" "Enough," Elena interrupted. "I don't want to hear what your mother said. You're a grown man, Diego. You're responsible for your own decisions." He looked up, and she saw tears in his eyes. "I'll fix it," he said passionately. "I swear, I'll get the money back." "I already spoke to Mom," she agreed. "It's too late," Elena shook her head. "This isn't about the money, Diego. It's about you, about your priorities, about your inability to be a husband instead of a son. I'm filing for divorce." "Elena, please," he dropped to his knees beside her bed, grabbing her hand. "I'll change. I promise. We can start over, without Mom. Just you and me." She gently pulled her hand free. "No, Diego. My decision is final. I'm leaving." She didn't tell him about Germany, the treatment, the plans she and Raphael had spent the day making. He didn't deserve to know. Diego stared at her for a long time, as if hoping she'd soften, reconsider. But Elena remained unmoved. "I understand," he finally said, rising to his feet. I'll sign whatever you need." He walked to the door, then paused on the threshold. "I want to meet him," he said, not turning around. "My father. Will you tell him?" "I will," Elena nodded. When the door closed behind him, she leaned back on her pillow, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Something had ended today, something that had once been an important part of her life. But ahead of her was something new, and perhaps better. She picked up the phone and dialed Raphael's number. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "Diego wants to meet you," she said without preamble. Silence followed on the other end. "Are you still there?" she asked after a few seconds. "Yes," Raphael's voice sounded strange. "It's just, I've waited 26 years for this, and now I don't know what to say." Elena smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Say whatever your heart tells you," she said. The rest will follow. The smell of coffee, fresh pastries, and disinfectant blended strangely in the hospital cafeteria, creating a unique atmosphere, not quite hospital, not quite cozy. Raphael sat at a table by the window, turning a cup of cooling espresso in his hands. He had arrived an hour early. Nervous, like a schoolboy before a first date. 26 years. A quarter of a century he had waited for this meeting. He had imagined it hundreds of times. Rehearsed scenarios in his head. Chosen his words carefully. And now, when the moment had finally come, all the prepared phrases dissolved, leaving only a deep anxiety and an unbearable longing to see his son. He noticed Diego before the younger man entered the cafeteria. A tall figure paused in the doorway. Eyes swept the room and found him. Raphael stood up, feeling his heart pounding in his throat. Diego approached slowly, as if pushing through invisible resistance. At 33, he was nearly the spitting image of Raphael in his youth, the same broad shoulders, the same posture, even the same walk. Only the eyes, those he had inherited from his mother. "Hello," Raphael said when his son stopped in front of him. "Hello," Diego replied, and his voice was hoarse, as if he had a cold. They stood for a moment, looking at each other across the chasm of lost years. Then Raphael gestured to the chair opposite him. "Will you sit?" Diego nodded and sat down, not taking his eyes off his father. He was studying this man, a stranger with a familiar face, someone he had been taught to hate since childhood. "Coffee?" Raphael asked, breaking the heavy silence. "Yes, thank you." Raphael waved to the waitress and ordered 2 espressos. He needed something to do with his hands to stop them from trembling. "You look a lot like me," he said once the waitress walked away. "At your age, I looked almost exactly the same." Diego gave a crooked smile. "Mom always said I took after her father. She said a lot of things." Raphael shook his head. "But the truth is, you're my son. And I never, not for one moment, stopped loving you." Diego flinched, as if those words physically hurt. His fists clenched on the table. "Then why did you leave?" he snapped. "Why did you leave me with her?" Raphael took a deep breath. There it was, the question he'd answered hundreds of times in his mind during imagined conversations with his son. "I didn't leave you," he said softly. "I left your mother. I couldn't take her control, her manipulation, her lies anymore. I was suffocating. But I fought for you, Diego. I wrote you letters every week. I called, I went to your school, I went to court trying to get visitation." He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the nightmare of court hearings, Carmen's accusations, her hysterics, her lies, and then her disappearance. "When I went to the house, new people were living there. When I called the school, I learned you had transferred. No address. No contacts. Your mother vanished with you. Changed cities, schools, phone numbers. I tried to find you through colleagues in law enforcement, but she was clever. Very clever. And determined." Diego said nothing, staring down at his hands. The coffee was brought to the table, but neither of them touched it. "And you?" Diego asked suddenly. "You just disappeared too?" Raphael shook his head. "No. I stayed in the same city. Kept the same job, lived at the same address. I was visible, son. If you had ever wanted to find me once you were grown, it wouldn't have been hard." Diego looked up, his eyes filled with pain and anger. "How could I look for you if I spent my whole life believing you'd abandoned us? That you betrayed us, left us for some. There was no other woman." Raphael shook his head again. "That was a lie. I didn't date anyone for over a year after the divorce. Then, by chance, I met someone. A good woman. We were together for 15 years. She died of cancer 5 years ago." He paused, remembering Isabel, quiet, wise, patient, the woman who had accepted him with all his pain, who shared his obsession with finding his son. "Her name was Isabel," he added quietly. She worked at a library. She helped me write the letters, even when we didn't know if they'd ever reach you. She wanted to meet you even more than I did. For the first time, Diego looked away, staring out the window at the soft drizzle of autumn rain. I don't know what to believe anymore, he said at last. My whole life I heard one version. Now you're telling me something completely different. I understand, Raphael nodded. And I'm not asking you to believe me right away. Just give me a chance to get to know you, to be your father, even now. Diego slowly lifted the cup to his lips as if it took all his focus. He took a sip and grimaced. The coffee had gone cold. Elena said, he began, shifting topics, that you're helping her. That you're sending her to Germany for treatment? Raphael nodded. I promised to get the full compensation back. But your mother already withdrew most of it in cash. And Elena needs treatment now. We can't afford to wait. I have connections in Germany, and I can afford to help her. Are you doing this to punish my mother? Diego asked directly. Or me? No, Raphael shook his head firmly. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because Elena didn't deserve what happened to her. And because I believe she's a good person, and she deserves help. Diego studied his father's face for several long seconds, as if searching for any sign of deception. Then he gave a small nod, apparently satisfied. I really screwed up, he said suddenly, his voice trembling. I betrayed my own wife, gave her money to my mother. I don't even know how I let that happen. It was like I was in some kind of trance. Raphael gently placed a hand on his son's clenched fist. Carmen has always known how to convince people, he said softly. She had a way of making people do exactly what she wanted, while believing it was their own idea. I lived with her for 10 years. I know. Diego didn't pull away from the touch. That, at least, was progress. Elena won't forgive me, he said quietly. And I understand that. I wouldn't forgive me either. Give her time, Raphael advised. Right now, she needs to focus on recovery. After that, well, life will decide. They talked for another 2 hours. Raphael asked about Diego's life, his work, his travels, his friends. Diego was a successful civil engineer. Gradually, the tension between them eased, the conversation flowed more freely. Only when Carmen's name came up did Diego stiffen again, his voice sharpening. I told her I wanted to meet you, he said as they were getting ready to leave. She screamed. Said I was betraying her, just like you once did. Said I was breaking her trust. And then, he hesitated. Then she said if I met with you, she'd disown me. Said I'd stop being her son. Raphael winced in pain. That was so like Carmen, the same emotional blackmail, the same threats. And what did you decide? Raphael asked cautiously. Diego gave a sad smile. I'm here, he said simply. I had to find out the truth, or at least try. They parted at the entrance to the hospital, sharing an awkward hug goodbye. It was only the first step, the first bridge across the chasm of lost years. But Raphael felt something in his heart that he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Elena gazed out the airplane window at the clouds drifting below. They looked like massive tufts of cotton scattered across an endless blue field. In a couple of hours, the plane would land in Hamburg, and a new chapter of her life would begin. Next to her, Raphael dozed. In the 2 weeks since they first met, he had become more than just a former father-in-law or the man funding her treatment. He had become a friend, dependable, attentive, wise. Someone who did everything in his power to ease her situation, from handling paperwork to arranging special transportation to the airport. The divorce from Diego had gone surprisingly smoothly. Her ex-husband hadn't contested a single point in the agreement, signing everything she asked for. He visited her in the hospital, quiet, subdued, guilt-ridden. He told her about meeting his father, about the painful process of reevaluating his life, and about his constant conflicts with his mother. She listened with sympathy, but without any desire to go back. I had a video call with Professor Schulz, Raphael said, suddenly waking. He's very optimistic. Says that with modern rehabilitation methods, you have a good chance of full recovery. Elena smiled. His concern, his constant readiness to help, still made her feel a little self-conscious. She still didn't fully understand why this successful, well-off man was spending so much time and money on his son's ex-wife. But she was grateful that life had brought him into hers. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "For everything. I don't know how to." "Stop thanking me every hour," he gently interrupted. "I'm not doing this for gratitude. And please, let's stop with the formalities, call me you. Sir makes me feel even older than I am." Elena nodded, though it still felt strange to address someone nearly twice her age so casually. "You didn't have to fly with me," she said. "You probably have so much to do back home. I could have managed on my own." Raphael shook his head. "First of all, no, you couldn't. With your spine, you need assistance. Second, I want to make sure the clinic lives up to its promises. And third," he smirked, "I haven't taken a vacation in years. The fish can wait." They sat in silence for a while, watching the clouds. Then Elena asked something that had been on her mind for days. "Why are you being so kind to me? Really? I'm a stranger to you." Raphael thoughtfully rubbed his chin. "You know, when I lost Diego, I swore to myself that if I ever got the chance to help someone who had suffered because of Carmen, I would do everything I could. Maybe it's my way of making up for not being able to protect my own son." He paused, then added more quietly, "And over these past weeks, I've gotten to know you better. You're strong, intelligent. You have dignity. You remind me of Isabel, my late wife. She never gave up, no matter what happened." Elena didn't know what to say. His words, that comparison, touched her deeply. "You're too kind," she said finally. "No," he replied with a soft smile. "I'm just fair. And besides, it feels good to help you. You make my old age a little less lonely." "You're nowhere near old age," Elena rolled her eyes. "I'm 62, dear," he chuckled. "At my age, people usually play with grandchildren. And I've only just found my son." They spent the rest of the flight discussing the upcoming treatment and life in Germany. Raphael planned to stay for 2 weeks to ensure Elena got settled, and then visit her periodically during her rehabilitation. The program was expected to last 3 to 6 months, depending on how her body responded to treatment. At Hamburg Airport, a driver holding a sign reading Mendez greeted them. The spacious Mercedes was equipped with everything necessary for transporting a spinal injury patient. Elena raised an eyebrow at Raphael in surprise. "I informed the clinic of our special requirements," he explained. "They arranged everything." The drive to the clinic took about an hour. Elena looked out at the neat German houses, well-kept gardens, clean streets, and felt a strange sense of peace, as if the very atmosphere of this place was encouraging her recovery. The Schulz clinic turned out to be a complex of modern buildings surrounded by a park. They were welcomed by the professor himself, a tall, lean man with sharp eyes and a strong accent. "Frau Mendez," he exclaimed, shaking Elena's hand. "At last. I've heard so much about you from Senor Raphael." He personally gave them a tour of the facility, the rehabilitation halls, pool, residential quarters. Elena was amazed. It felt more like a luxury resort than a medical center. "We believe in a holistic approach," Schulz explained. "We treat not just the body, but the soul. That's why we create the most comfortable environment possible for our patients." Her room was a spacious suite with a view of the park. The professor promised that a full examination would begin the next morning. For now, he recommended she rest after the journey. When they were alone, Elena turned to Raphael. This is too much," she said, gesturing to the luxurious room. "I don't even want to imagine how much it costs." "Don't," he shook his head. "What matters is that you get the best treatment. The rest doesn't matter." She looked at him, this strong, reliable man who cared for her with no hidden agenda, and felt tears of gratitude welling up. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for restoring my faith in people." The first weeks at the clinic were difficult: tests, blood work, consultations with specialists. Then the rehabilitation began, exhausting daily sessions that left her muscles burning and her back throbbing with a dull ache. But Elena gritted her teeth and pushed through with a determination that surprised even the seasoned German physiotherapists. Raphael left after 2 weeks, just as he had planned, but he called every day, asking about her condition, sharing news from home. It was from him that she learned Diego had moved out of his mother's house and rented his own apartment, that he had begun meeting regularly with his father and was slowly rebuilding their relationship, and that Carmen had fallen into a deep depression after her son's betrayal and refused to speak to him. Life at the clinic soon settled into a rhythm: wake up at 7, breakfast, therapy, lunch, rest, more therapy, dinner, free time. Elena made friends with a few other patients, mostly Germans, but also an American and a Swede. In the evenings, they would gather in the common lounge, watch movies, play board games, and share stories of their injuries and recoveries. After a month, she took her first steps without support. It was a moment of triumph, small, but deeply meaningful. She immediately called Raphael to share the joy, and he promised to fly in the following week to witness it himself. When he arrived, Elena was already walking down the clinic's hallway with the help of a walker. Raphael looked at her with such pride, as if it were his own personal victory. "Professor Schulz says you're making phenomenal progress," he told her as they sat in the clinic's park. It was a warm April day, tulips and daffodils blooming all around. "I'm trying," Elena shrugged. "I want to get back to normal life as soon as possible." Raphael looked at her closely. "Do you have any plans for what you'll do when treatment is over?" She paused. Over the past months, she'd had plenty of time to reflect and reevaluate her life. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't want to go back home. Too many memories. Maybe another city, or even another country. I like Germany." "I could help you find a job here," Raphael offered. "I have business contacts in Hamburg, and with your logistics experience, I think it's very possible." Elena smiled. His constant willingness to help still touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'll think about it. But first, I need to fully recover." They spoke of the future, of possibilities, of new beginnings. And Elena felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time: anticipation. The thrill of a new life, free from past mistakes and disappointments. Raphael stayed in Hamburg for 5 days. They went on walks as much as her condition allowed, took tours of the city, even attended an opera. Elena noticed that she felt safe and calm around him, a feeling she had sorely lacked in her marriage to Diego. "I'll fly back in a month," he said at the airport. "By then, I'm sure you'll be running marathons." She laughed and hugged him lightly goodbye. Strangely, the gesture felt completely natural. In early June, just as Elena was walking independently with a cane and planning her return home, she received a strange phone call. An unknown number lit up on the screen. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Elena?" The voice was female, uncertain. "It's Elena, a friend of Diego's. We've never met, but I need to talk to you. It's important." Elena tensed. A friend of Diego's? What could be so important that she'd call her all the way in Germany? "I'm listening," Elena said in a neutral tone. "It's about Carmen." Elena's voice wavered. There's been an accident. 3 days ago, she fell off an electric scooter and seriously injured her spine. The doctors say she will most likely end up in a wheelchair." Elena was silent, unsure of what to feel. The irony was cruel. Carmen had sustained the same injury she had. But there was no schadenfreude, only a strange sense of detached astonishment. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "But why are you calling me?" "Because Diego," Elena hesitated. "He's reacting strangely. At first, he was in shock, running around the hospital, arranging the best doctors. And then he suddenly went cold. He said he would place his mother in a specialized care facility for the disabled. She screamed, cried, begged him not to, but it was like he didn't hear her. And what does that have to do with me? Elena asked, though she was already beginning to understand. It's like he's mirroring what happened to you, Elena said quietly. As if it's some kind of retribution. I'm afraid he's not in his right mind. I think you're the only one who might be able to get through to him. Elena closed her eyes. She had no desire to get involved. She had already started a new life, left the past behind, and now it was trying to drag her back with its clawing grip. I don't think I can help, she said finally. We're divorced. He won't listen to me. Please, Elena's voice was full of desperation. Just talk to him. He can't do this to her, no matter how terrible she was. A warm wind from the Elba played with Elena's hair as she sat by the waterfront, watching barges glide past. In 3 months, she had grown used to this place, the neat brick buildings, the clean streets, the German order and tranquility. Here in Hamburg, the past felt far away, like something that had happened to someone else. The phone in her hand felt heavier than usual. 2 days had passed since her call with Elena, but Elena still hadn't gathered the courage to dial Diego's number. What could she say? Why would he even listen to her? And most importantly, why should she drag herself back into the mess she had fought so hard to escape? I need to talk to Raphael, she thought, opening her contact list. Strange how quickly he had become her most trusted confidant, her anchor. Elena? Raphael's voice was concerned. Something wrong? You don't usually call at this time. Do you already know about Carmen? She asked directly. The pause on the other end was more telling than any words. Yes, he said at last. Diego told me 3 days ago. Spinal fracture, nerve damage, the prognosis is grim. Did you know he's planning to put her in a care home? Silence again, longer this time. No, Raphael's voice grew sharper. He didn't tell me that. Elena sighed and told him about Elena's call, her concern, and Diego's odd behavior. I think he's trying to get revenge on her, she finished. Like fate handed him the chance to settle the score. And I don't know if I should intervene. Raphael was silent for a long time. Only the sound of his heavy breathing assured her he was still on the line. I'll talk to him, he said finally. This isn't the path he should take. Revenge never brings healing. But you haven't forgiven Carmen for what she did to you, Elena said gently. No, he agreed. I haven't. But I didn't seek revenge either, even when I could have. And now it doesn't matter anymore. Carmen punished herself with her own manipulation, her need for control. She lost her son long before this injury. And if he becomes just as ruthless as she once was, he'll lose himself. Elena closed her eyes. She knew Raphael was right. And yet, a part of her, the dark, vengeful part, felt a strange satisfaction knowing Carmen had finally gotten what she deserved. That now she would know what it felt like to lie helpless, dependent, in pain and humiliation. I'll call him, Elena said suddenly, surprised by her own decision. I don't know what I'll say, but I'll try. Are you sure? Raphael's voice was cautious. You don't have to. You don't owe him anything. I don't, Elena agreed. But maybe I owe it to myself. To truly close this chapter. After the call with Raphael, she sat for a long time by the river, gathering her thoughts. What could she say to Diego? How would she explain her sudden interest in his life? And what did she even hope to achieve? The sun was already dipping toward the horizon when she finally dialed her ex-husband's number. The ringing seemed endless, and Elena was about to hang up when she finally heard a click. Elena. Diego's voice sounded surprised and guarded. Hi, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. How are you? I'm okay, he replied after a pause. And you? How's your treatment going? Good. I'm almost fully recovered. I still use a cane, But the doctors say in another month or so I won't need it anymore. That's great. His voice was full of genuine relief. I'm really glad for you. A heavy silence followed. Elena looked at the dark waters of the Elba, steadying herself. Diego, I know about your mom, she said at last. And about your plans. The silence on the other end turned icy, tangible. Who told you? He asked sharply. My father? No. Your friend Elena. She's worried about you. Diego let out a short, bitter laugh. Worried? She just doesn't get it. No one does. Only you. Only you know what I went through. Elena heard something unstable in his voice, feverish, desperate. Diego, she said gently, whatever your mother did, putting her in a home when she needs your help, that's not the solution. Not the solution? His voice spiked. So what is? Ruin my life taking care of the person who controlled and manipulated me for 33 years? Who destroyed my marriage, turned me against my father, made me do things I can't even think about now without shame? That's your solution? Elena closed her eyes. She understood his anger, his disappointment, his pain. She had gone through the same, the realization that someone you loved had betrayed you, the bitterness of seeing how blind you had been. I'm not saying you have to forgive her or forget what happened, she said quietly. But you don't need to take revenge. That won't give you back the years you lost, won't undo the mistakes, won't make you happier. How would you know? His voice was bitter. When I told her I'd found my father, do you know what she did? She screamed that I was a traitor, said I was just as worthless as him. And then... He hesitated. Then she said it was all your fault. That you were always a whore who seduced me just to get to the family money. Elena flinched. Even now, after everything that had happened, Carmen's words could still hurt. And did you believe her? Elena asked softly. No. Diego exclaimed. Of course not. I told her she doesn't control me anymore, that I'll decide for myself who to talk to and what to believe. And then his voice trembled, she said it would have been better if I'd never been born, that I ruined her life, that she sacrificed everything for me and I repaid her with ungratefulness. Elena said nothing, horrified by the depth of toxicity in that relationship. How had Diego even survived in such an atmosphere? How had he managed to preserve any shred of normalcy? And now, Diego continued, his voice growing more distant, now she's in the same hospital where you were, with the same injury. Isn't it poetic justice? Isn't it fair that now she knows what it feels like to be helpless, to depend on others? To be abandoned by the one person you counted on the most when you needed them? Elena felt a chill run down her spine. In his words, in his tone, there was something unsettling, as if it wasn't Diego speaking, but someone else. Dark, vengeful, feeding on pain. But if you do this, she said carefully, how will you be any better than her? You'll become the same, someone capable of cruelty and betrayal. The silence on the line was so long that Elena thought the call had dropped. But then Diego spoke, quietly, almost in a whisper. I don't know how to be anything else. I don't know who I am without her control, without her expectations. I've spent my whole life being who she wanted me to be. And now it's like I'm in a void. In those words, Elena heard the real tragedy, not Carmen's injury, not the divorce, not the lost years, but the tragedy of a man who had been stripped of his own identity, his own will, his own self. You can be whoever you want, she said gently. You can start over, build a life the way you want it. But for that, you have to let go of the past, the pain, the anger, the desire for revenge. I don't know if I can, Diego whispered. You can, Elena said firmly. You're stronger than you think. And you have support. Your father, your friends, you're not alone. They spoke for nearly another hour. Diego told her about his meetings with his father, about how he was slowly getting to know this man, about the painful process of rethinking everything he'd believed since childhood. Elena listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just letting him speak in silence. "Thank you," he said at the end of their conversation. "For calling. For listening. I'll think about what you said." "You're welcome," she replied sincerely. After the call ended, Elena sat for a long time on the promenade, looking out at the dark water and the lights of the evening city. Strangely, the conversation hadn't brought pain or regret, only a quiet understanding that this chapter of her life was truly closed. She dialed Raphael's number. "I spoke to him," she said when he answered. "I don't know if it'll help, but at least he promised to think about it." "Thank you," Raphael's voice was full of genuine gratitude. "You have no idea how much that means to me." "He's a good person," Elena said thoughtfully. "Just lost. Confused." "I know," Raphael sighed. "And I'll do everything I can to help him find himself, even if it might already be too late." "It's never too late," Elena said firmly. "If I could start over after everything that happened, then he can too." Raphael was silent for a moment. "You're an extraordinary woman, Elena," he said at last. "Strong, wise, capable of compassion, even for those who hurt you. I'm grateful I met you." Elena felt warmth rise in her cheeks. There was something in Raphael's voice, something deeper than friendship or gratitude. Something that made her heart beat faster. "I'm glad we met too," she said softly. "Despite everything." "Speaking of meeting," Raphael said, his tone shifting to a more businesslike note, "I'm flying in tomorrow. We need to discuss your transfer to the rehabilitation center and some other plans." "Other plans?" she asked curiously. "Yes," he said mysteriously. "But we'll talk about it in person." Raphael arrived the next day, as punctual and organized as always. They met at a small cafe near the clinic, a place that had become their unofficial meeting spot during his visits. "You look wonderful," he said, kissing her hand as he always did. It was a small gesture, but one that never failed to warm Elena's heart. "You're barely limping." "The cane's more for confidence now than necessity," she smiled. "The doctors say the progress is phenomenal." They ordered coffee and pastries, and spent some time chatting about her treatment, news from home, and the weather. But Elena could sense that Raphael was slightly tense, as if preparing to say something important. "Did something happen?" she asked at last. "You seem worried?" He gave a faint smile. "Not worried. More uncertain. There's something I need to tell you, and I don't know how you'll take it." Elena tensed. What could trouble this usually composed man so deeply? "Just say it," she offered. "Whatever it is." Raphael took a deep breath. "I spoke to Diego after your call," he began. "We talked for a long time. And he agreed not to send his mother to a care home. Instead, he hired a nurse and arranged in-home care for Carmen." Elena smiled with relief. "That's wonderful. So our conversations helped." "Yes," Raphael nodded. "But that's not all. Diego told me something else. He said he still loves you, that the divorce was a mistake, and he wants to win you back." Elena froze, her cup halfway to her lips. Of all the things she might have expected to hear, this was the last. "But we're divorced," she said, bewildered. "He betrayed me. I've started a new life." "I know," Raphael looked at her with a strange mix of pain and hope. "And I told him you probably wouldn't want to go back. But he's clinging to the idea. He thinks that if he fixes things with his mother, if he proves he's changed, you might give him a second chance." Elena slowly set the cup down. Her thoughts were tangled. She didn't hate Diego. Their talk the day before had shown her that she had, if not forgiven, at least come to terms with what had happened. But there was no love left, only compassion and a kind of friendly concern. "I'm not going back to him," she said firmly. "It's impossible. Too much has happened." Raphael watched her closely, as if searching her face for confirmation. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "He really is changing, Elena. And he's willing to do anything to win you back. She frowned, not understanding where he was going with this. Why are you asking? Do you want me to go back to him? No. Raphael's answer came so forcefully that a few cafe patrons turned to look. He lowered his voice. No, not at all. I had to be sure. Sure of what? He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. That I have a chance, he said finally. That I'm not about to ruin another life out of selfishness. Elena stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? Raphael reached across the table and gently took her hand. Elena, he said softly, I know there's a big age gap between us. I know we've only known each other for a few months. I know you've just come out of a difficult relationship and are still healing. I know my feelings might seem inappropriate or strange. But I can't stay silent anymore. I've fallen in love with you, Elena, like a boy, like a madman. And if there's no chance, if you see me only as a friend, or worse, as a father figure, just tell me now, and I'll never bring it up again. Elena stared at him, stunned. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from her chest. She opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. I'm sorry, Raphael began to pull away, misreading her silence. I shouldn't have. She tightened her grip on his hand, stopping him. No, she said, finally finding her voice. Don't apologize. I wasn't expecting this. I thought you cared about me because of Diego, out of some sense of duty or... I don't know. Maybe at first, he admitted. But then I got to know you. I saw your strength, your kindness, your dignity. And I realized I hadn't felt anything like this since I lost Isabel. Elena felt warmth rush to her cheeks. She had never thought of Raphael in a romantic way, or maybe she had, but hadn't dared admit it, not even to herself. The age gap, his being her ex-father-in-law, the complexity of the situation, but now, looking into his eyes, full of sincere emotion, she understood that her own heart had made its choice long ago. I feel something too, she said quietly. But I'm scared. Scared it's too complicated, too messy. What will people think? What will Diego say? To hell with people, Raphael said suddenly, sharply. And Diego? Diego is a grown man. He'll deal with it. Especially if he truly wants you to be happy, and not just to possess you like. He cut himself off, but Elena understood the unspoken comparison. Like his mother tried to possess him. I'm not asking you to decide right now, Raphael said more gently. I just needed you to know. And if you tell me that we can only ever be friends, I'll accept it. I'll still be here. I'll still help you in any way I can. Elena looked at this man, strong, dependable, willing to set aside his own happiness for her comfort, and felt something click into place. Like the final piece of a puzzle finally found its spot. I don't want just friendship, she said quietly. I want to try. To see where it leads. No promises, no guarantees, just day by day. Raphael's face lit up with such joy that Elena couldn't help smiling back. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. That's more than I could have hoped for, he said. Day by day, that's a beautiful beginning. 3 years later, Elena stood on the same Hamburg waterfront, looking out over the water. The cane had long since been gone, the injury's only remnants were a slight limp on especially cold days, and a scar she had come to accept as part of her story. Life had turned out differently than she could ever have imagined while lying in that hospital bed. Now she had a job at an international logistics company, a cozy apartment in an old Hamburg neighborhood, and a relationship she hadn't dared dream of. Raphael came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. What are you thinking about? He asked, kissing her temple. Life, she smiled, turning to him. About how strangely things turn out. Who would have thought 3 years ago that we'd be here together? He smiled back, but something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps. Do you regret it? Not for a second, Elena said firmly, taking his hand. A simple gold ring gleamed on her finger. They had married a year ago in a quiet ceremony with only their closest friends. Diego called, Raphael said, changing the subject. He's coming next week. He wants to introduce us to his fiancée. Elena smiled. After everything that had happened, Diego had not only accepted their relationship, but even seemed genuinely happy for them. He visited Hamburg every few months, spending time with his father, rebuilding the bond they had lost in childhood. With Elena, he was respectfully friendly, without a trace of former feelings. Is it that same Elena? She asked with curiosity. No, someone new. I think her name is Maria. They met at a psychotherapy course. Elena nodded. After everything he'd been through, Diego had started working on himself, seeing a therapist, taking personal development classes, trying to make sense of his complicated relationship with his mother and his own inner wounds. And how's Carmen? Elena asked. Even now, after all these years, the name stirred a complex mix of emotions in her. Raphael sighed. Diego had played the role of dutiful son only briefly. He eventually placed his mother in a specialized care facility where she would likely spend the rest of her days. Sometimes, justice worked with mathematical precision. Everyone got what they deserved, it just took time.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.